The world was not always for us. There was a time, 30,000 winters ago, when the sky itself seemed to resent us, when the stars disappeared behind storms that never ended, and the earth below cracked open with hunger. We call it the Ice Age, but that name carries no weight compared to the bone-deep silence of it. The snow did not fall like in stories. It pressed downward like punishment. Trees snapped under its weight. Rivers froze mid-sentence. And man, his skin was thick like leather, and his eyes, pale as ash, had seen the death of his children, the death of his friends, and the slow starvation of everything he loved. He spoke little. Words cost warmth. Man began to vanish. He remembered a story his grandmother told him, that once, in a time even darker than this, their people had eaten the roots of fire. The cold bit into his joints, hissed through his teeth. He walked until the night turned blue. And there, among blackened trees and scorched earth, he found it. A flower, glowing faintly, growing from ash. He chewed the root. It tasted like metal and smoke. He collapsed, a plant red as blood that grew only where lightning struck twice. It's madness to most. But madness was the only thing they hadn't tried. He could run longer, think sharper, dream clearer. It was not magic, but adaptation. It was adaptation. Forced. Painful. Miraculous. They were not many to begin with. A few thousand, perhaps, scattered across what we now call Africa, Asia, and parts of Europe. The blood in their veins was warm, but their numbers were cold. And then, as if struck by some cosmic cruelty, the world turned against them. They're humans, small and soft-skinned, with no claws, no fangs, and no fur, were not meant to win. Temperatures plummeted. Game disappeared. Crops with primitive roots they could dig refused to grow. Entire bands of early humans vanished without a trace, swallowed by frost, famine, or something darker. In the valley of Titha, jagged gorge in what is now southern Ethiopian elder named Kar lived with the last of a once great tribe. At night, the tribe would huddle in a cave, the fire flickering not from wood, had all been burned but from dung and dry moss. They whispered of the cold spirits, phantoms that fed on breath, that left footprints leading nowhere. One child claimed to have seen them tall, eyeless things cloaked in ice. The others believed him, because it was easier to believe in monsters than to accept that the world itself no longer wanted them. But the truth was more frightening. It wasn't spirits killing them, it was logic, evolution, a world that selected ruthlessly. Yet something stirred in Kar's mind, something older than language. So Kar left the cave one night, alone, clutching a stone blade dull from use. And when he woke, the snow around him had melted in a perfect circle. His breath steamed, heavy and long. Something had changed. When he returned, the tribe thought him possessed. Within days, his wounds closed faster. His bones cracked and realigned. They began calling him the one who burns, and they followed. But adaptation is not a gift. It is a debt, and the world would collect its price. The cave walls began to pulse with heat, not the warmth of a hearth or the comfort of flesh pressed against flesh, but something raw, something primal like the belly of a beast just before it wakes. The others, those who had once been Kar's kin, his equals now looked at him as one might, a storm that had learned to speak. Some followed him with reverence, others with fear. But all followed, because he had returned from the dead. Because in a world where death was law, he had become the only defiance.
Oh.
They called themselves the Rusa, the ones who bend but do not break, spoke of others, not animals, not spirits, people, but not like them. They began consuming the fire, root sparingly at first, then more. It did not affect all the same. Some grew stronger, faster, others lost their minds. One mother, Isha, swore the root allowed her to hear the trees speak, a tribe that had not adapted but devolved. Consumed by the cold until they had forgotten how to speak, how to feel, how to be anything but hunger. Then the bodies dragged half into the snow, throats slit, tongues missing. Not killed for food, for fear. Another man, Lore, gouged out his own eyes, claiming they were lying to him. So they did what humans have always done in the face of extinction. Up mountains where the air itself tried to kill them. No signs of the Calvaru, just ice, endless and silent. They lost the old and the sick first, then the young. Carr carried the bones of his last daughter tied to his belt knot out of grief, but to remember what he owed, built no fire, spoke no names. They became less than human to survive what no human was meant to endure. Time blurred, language fractured. They forgot the sky. He wandered into the snow, whispering that he could finally see. But the changes were real. But they wear no fire. Their skin is white as bone. Their eyes are holes. They eat the fallen. Their skin thickened, rough as bark. Their blood ran slower, as if resisting the cold. Their minds, once dulled by hunger now, flickered with visions, with dreams too precise to be random. They began to draw in the dirt. Patterns of the stars above, the migration of prey, the shape of storms not yet born. It was as though the fire root had awoken something ancient inside them, some memory of survival buried in bone, a boy though he had no name. He did not cry at the wind. His heartbeat was slow, deliberate, like a drum in the dark. Carr watched him for days, saying nothing. Still, death lingered. The world was not done with them, not yet. One night, as the winds screamed like wounded animals, a scout stumbled back to the cave arms, torn, face pale with terror. "They walk like us," he rasped, blood bubbling from his lips. Carr said nothing, but something inside him twisted. He had heard of them before, in the myths of the Elder Fires. The Kalvaru, the people without breath. Days later they came, not in war parties, in shadows, in silence. The first sign was always the same: no birds. Then a smell, sweet and rotten. The Ruka could not fight what they could not see. They ran. Through forests, turned to bone. Across rivers that cracked like glass. At last they reached a high plateau where nothing lived. No trees, no beasts. They called it the place of waiting. There, they dug into the earth like animals. But something endured. Something impossible. A child was born. It's not just born, but smiling, breathing steady, skin warm without fire. And when the boy stood barefoot on snow that hissed away beneath him, they knew he was not the future. He was the proof that there might still be a future. They feared him at first. The child who warmed the snow with his footsteps, who never blinked at the sun, even when it tore through the clouds like a blade. They whispered that he had no shadow, that the light bent around him, afraid to touch his skin. And yet they followed him, because Kartha, one who burns, knelt before him. He did not speak, not in the way men speak. His eyes seemed to look through people, into their thoughts, their lies, their memories. And when he touched a wounded animal, it stilled, then rose, breathing easier. Not in their bodies, those had long adapted, but in their minds. They stopped fearing the cold. They stopped running. They began building not shelters, but shapes. Spirals in the ice. Circles carved into frozen stone. No one remembered who taught them. Only that when they arranged the rocks a certain way, the wind softened. That when they sang a certain tone, the frost receded. That Oru would smile not with joy, but with recognition. He was not a god. Gods are cruel and demand worship. Oru demanded nothing, simply was. And if the fire could kneel, then so could the rest. They called him Oru, though he never answered to any name. They wore skins stitched with human faces. Their jaws were painted in ash. The boy stood unmoving, eyes wide, as if listening to something no one else could hear. But what terrified the Ruka most was that they spoke, not in words, in mockery. A mimicry of what speech once was like, a mirror cracked beyond recognition. And so he led them not with words, but with silence. Under his guidance, the Ruka began to change again. It was not magic. It was memory. Its memory so old it had become instinct. Carr, now old and half-blind, watched all of this from a distance. His bones ached. His breath rattled like leaves in winter. But his mind burned brighter than ever. He began scratching symbols into bone marks that resembled the stars, the spiral of a snail shell, the curve of a mother's spine. The smoke reversed, pulling back into ash. The ground cracked, not downward but upward, lifting the glacier like a curtain. One began to eat his own hand. The ice beneath them fractured in spirals, then swallowed them. And from beneath it came a sound no human had ever heard, a hum so low it vibrated inside their bones. Not pain, not fear. Something older. One morning, a cairn of rocks arranged by Oru had been scattered. The next, a hunter returned with his eyes torn out. No blood. Just hollow pits and a single bone placed in his mouth, like a warning. Then the sky turned black, not with storm, but with smoke. He began to write, though the word did not yet exist. And in those symbols, he wrote the story of mankind not as it was, but as it might become. But peace never lasts, not for the ones who remember fire. The Kalvaru had followed. No one saw them come. His last act was to place the boy's hand upon his chest and smile. They had learned to burn. No longer silent, the Kalvaru came screaming down the slopes like beasts unleashed. Kar gathered the tribe beneath the glacier cliff, where the wind howled loudest. He looked at Aru, and then he walked forward, alone. The tribe screamed for him. Kar tried to rise, but his legs refused. Oru kept walking, into the dark, into the mouths of monsters. But the Kalvaru did not attack. They parted, like waves around stone, and in the center of their horde, Oru knelt, placed his hand on the ice, and then everything stopped. The fire in their torches flickered once, then went out. The Kalvaru dropped to the snow. Some screamed. Others laughed, and Oru returned untouched. From that moment on, none dared speak his name aloud. They simply called him the Memory. Kar died that winter. No tears, no fear, just understanding. For he knew now, extinction was never the end. It was only the silence before the next song began. Long after Kar was buried beneath stones etched with spirals, long after the wind had smoothed away his name, the tribe endured. They called themselves Ulamara, the carriers of fire. But even they did not know what they were truly carrying. Or perhaps he aged so slowly that no one noticed. Generations passed, yet he remained, watching as children became elders and elders became stories. They began to say that he was not a boy at all, but a memory given flesh, a remnant of something the world had forgotten, or something it had once tried to bury. Oru stopped aging. The Ulamara no longer hid in caves. They learned to speak to the stone and to the air. They carved halls beneath the ice, warmed not by flame but by vibration tones. Oru taught them in dreams. They built monoliths, impossibly tall, that caught the light of stars and bent it into colors they could taste. In the presence of the boy, that living memory had held it still. But now without him, the past had returned. The stars no longer moved the way they used to. In the dreams began to rot, and its voice, if it was a voice, spoke inside the skull. He was not yours to keep. Others tried to fight, hurling spears, screaming the names of ancestors, but none could stand against it. For it was not death. It was before death. It was the memory of what humans were never meant to remember. They no longer feared the night, because Oru was there, and Oru did not fear. Time, even when denied, finds a way. Curved spines, shattered jaws, dozens, hundreds, all reaching toward something buried in the center. When she awoke, she ran to Oru's chamber. The elders began to notice a change. Sky above their mountain burned less brightly. Children would wake screaming of a hole in the sky, of teeth beneath the ground, of whispers that said, "Give him back." They sang the spiral. They lit the stones with blood, but it was too late. What rose from beneath the glacier was not a creature, it was a wound. One woman, Ken, dreamt of a field filled with bones, human but twisted. But Aru was gone. The mountain trembled. Ground once solid began to bleed heat. Not warmth, hunger. It became clear something had been sleeping beneath them all along. The elders gathered, chanting the old tones. A great black hollow, shaped like a man but empty, its face was a mask of screaming silence. Its body dripped with frost that burned. The tribe fell into panic. Some fled down the mountain, never to be seen again. And then, at the final moment, when the last of the Ulamara stood on the edge of the cliff, clutching her infant in the dark, Aru returned. He landed in silence, palms open, eyes closed. The wound shivered. For the first time, it recoiled. I am what you forgot. I am the hunger that chose not to feed. I remember what you are, and I refuse. And with that, he stepped into the hollow, not to fight but to return. No explosion, just silence. A silence so deep it crushed the wind, the stars, the thought of sound. Then peace. There was no light. The mountain calmed. The sky cleared. And the wound in the world vanished. Oru was gone. They spread slowly, cautiously across the land. Some went west, into what would become Europe. Others east, into Asia. A few returned south, back to the cradle. Not of land, but of memory. But in his place, etched into the stone, into the bones, into the dreams of those who remained, was a map. It taught them not how to survive, but how to remember. How to remember the fire that walked, the boy without a shadow, the death that blinked first. Each carried a piece of Oru, not his body, not his blood, but the silence he left behind. And in that silence, humanity grew. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the smartest, but because they had almost remembered how it felt.